My fingers trembled as I signed the funeral home's final paperwork. Not from grief, though God knows there was plenty, but from 5 days running on black coffee and condolence casseroles, 30 signatures, and just like that, 42 years of marriage became a paid invoice with an embossed seal. My name is Barbara Lawson. I'm 68 years old, and this is the story of how my daughter-in-law tried to sell my home while sympathy cards were still arriving. What she didn't realize, before I was Howard's wife or Andrew's mother, I spent 32 years as a property attorney. If this situation resonates with your soul, click subscribe and let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from. Mrs. Lawson? The funeral director's voice was professionally gentle. Is there someone who can drive you home? I almost laughed. Home was where I dreaded going most. Home where Howard's reading chair still held the indent of his body. Where his coffee mug, the chipped blue one he refused to replace, still sat by the sink. My son is waiting in the parking lot, I said, my voice steadier than I expected. When I slid into the passenger seat, the silence had weight. Andrew had never been comfortable with emotions. My son, the cardiologist, who could discuss aortic dissections without blinking, but stammered through Hallmark cards. "You did great, Mom," he finally said, eyes fixed on the road. The house looked exactly as we'd left it 5 days ago when the ambulance came. Howard's gardening gloves still draped over the porch railing, the newspaper he'd never finish reading folded by his chair. "Vanessa's inside," Andrew said as he cut the engine. "She picked up groceries and got things ready." My daughter-in-law met us at the door, perfectly put together in a black dress that somehow looked both respectful and stylish. At 39, she possessed the confidence I remembered having in the courtroom decades ago, before I'd stepped back from my career to support Howard's business and raise Andrew. "Barbara, there you are." She embraced me with a precise hug, firm enough to show support, brief enough to avoid awkwardness. Everything set up in the dining room. The table was meticulous. Our good china, Howard's favorite serving dishes, cloth napkins at each place, a memorial dinner for close family before everyone scattered back to their lives. It was as coffee and dessert were being served that everything shifted. "Barbara," Vanessa's voice cut through my fog, her tone carefully modulated. "Andrew and I have been talking, and we think it might be good to discuss what comes next." I looked up, confused. "What comes next?" "Practical matters," she clarified, setting down her coffee cup with a precise clink. "The house, for instance." The air left my lungs so suddenly, I nearly gasped. In that moment, I felt something I hadn't expected in the swirl of grief, a sharp, clarifying anger. "The house?" I repeated. Andrew shifted uncomfortably. "Mom, we just thought." "What Vanessa means," Elizabeth interrupted, her eyes narrowing slightly, "is that eventually you'll need to decide what you want to do. But there's absolutely no rush." "Actually," Vanessa said, reaching into a folder I hadn't noticed beside her plate, "there are some financial considerations that might make timing important." She slid a printed real estate listing across the table, one for a condominium complex across town. The page was crisp, the date in the corner showing it had been generated 3 days ago, while Howard's body was still at the funeral home. "The Willowbrook residences have an excellent community for seniors," Vanessa continued. "There's one available now with a first-floor master. I've already spoken with the sales agent, and she's willing to meet tomorrow." "I don't think tomorrow works for me," I said, my voice so calm it surprised even me. My hands were no longer trembling. Instead, a peculiar stillness had settled over me, the same focused calm I used to feel before cross-examining a hostile witness. Vanessa smiled with practiced sympathy. "Of course you need time, but these units move quickly, and with the current market conditions, we should really list this house sooner rather than later to maximize value." We should list the house. Maximize value, as though my home of 35 years was primarily an investment property. "I haven't decided to sell," I said. That night, after everyone left, I stood in Howard's study feeling the weight of 4 decades surrounding me. His desk calendar still showed the day of his heart attack, his reading glasses folded neatly beside it. "What am I supposed to do now?" I whispered to the empty room, not expecting the answer that came to me with startling clarity. I opened Howard's desk drawer and found exactly what I knew would be there. Our home ownership files, property title, mortgage payoff confirmation, renovation records, tax assessments, 35 years of documentation that told the story of the life we'd built. My hands no longer trembled as I spread the documents across Howard's desk. For the first time since the ambulance had pulled away from our house 5 days ago, I felt something cut through the fog of grief purpose. The next morning, I woke to the sound of Howard not making coffee. It was the silence that roused me, the absence of the grinder he'd run precisely at 6:45 a.m. for 42 years. My phone buzzed with a text from Vanessa. "Just checking in. Let me know if you're up for meeting the Willowbrook agent today. She can do 2 p.m. I dressed with deliberate care, choosing clothes I hadn't worn in years. A blouse and slacks I'd once worn to closings, my professional watch, small armor against whatever the day might bring. In the kitchen, I found myself reaching for Howard's chipped blue mug before catching myself. As the coffee brewed, I remembered the day we'd signed the closing papers on this house. "This will be our forever home," Howard had said, squeezing my hand. Forever, it turned out, was exactly 35 years, 2 months, and 18 days. My phone buzzed again. "The agent is very flexible. Shall I tell her 3 p.m. instead?" I muted notifications and opened my laptop. I typed Willowbrook Senior Residences into the search bar and found the unit Vanessa had mentioned, a ground floor 1-bedroom priced at I sat back. The median home value in our neighborhood was currently around $65,000. The math didn't add up. The doorbell interrupted my thoughts. Elizabeth, Howard's sister, stood there holding a bag from our favorite bakery. "I brought those almond croissants you like," she said. "And I wanted to see how you're holding up after yesterday." "Vanessa's pushing the Willowbrook place pretty hard," she finally said, accepting the mug I handed her. "Yes. And that doesn't strike you as odd? Less than a week after Howard's funeral?" I met her eyes over my coffee cup. "It struck me as many things. Odd is certainly one of them," Elizabeth nodded. "I did some asking around. That real estate agent Vanessa mentioned, she's a college friend of Vanessa's. They were sorority sisters." Something clicked into place. This wasn't the first time Vanessa had made decisions about my life without consulting me. The Thanksgiving she'd reorganized my kitchen. The time she'd replaced the living room furniture as a surprise. Small incursions that Howard had always smoothed over. "Tell me what you're thinking, Barb," Elizabeth said, using the shortened name only she and Howard ever used. "I'm thinking my daughter-in-law has been planning this for a while." "Planning what, exactly?" I gestured toward my laptop. The Willowbrook unit cost $375,000. Our house is worth nearly twice that. Elizabeth's eyebrows rose. "And who would benefit from the difference?" "That," I said, "is what I intend to find out." After she left, I returned to Howard's study. The computer hummed to life when I pressed the power button. I knew his password, our son's birth date, followed by my initials. His email opened automatically. I scrolled through, not sure what I was looking for, until I found it. An email exchange between Howard and our family attorney dated just 2 months ago, with Howard requesting specific provisions to ensure I had complete control over any decisions regarding the residence. I continued searching and found an email from 3 months ago from Michael Delgado, Westside Development Group, expressing interest in our property. Howard's reply firmly rejected any consideration of selling. Most revealing was an email from Vanessa to Howard around the same time. "I really think you should reconsider the development group's offer. The neighborhood is changing, The Willowbrook residences I mentioned would be perfect for you both. My breath caught. Vanessa had known about the developer's interest and had been advocating for us to sell even before Howard's death. Through the window, I saw Andrew's car pulling up, Vanessa in the passenger seat. During lunch, Vanessa mentioned new zoning proposals that might affect our property value, information I hadn't seen in any neighborhood communications. And you know this because I let the question hang. I keep up with these things, she said, her voice rising slightly at the end. A tell I recognized from years of deposition work. When I mentioned Westside Development Group's interest in our home, Vanessa's composure slipped. I think Barbara might be confused. Howard never mentioned anything like that to me. That's interesting, I said, considering you emailed him specifically about reconsidering the development group's offer on March 15th. After they left, I found a draft email Howard had never sent to Andrew. I'm concerned about Vanessa's persistence regarding selling the house. I've updated our will to ensure Barbara's wishes regarding the property will be respected should anything happen to me. I opened a fresh legal pad and began making detailed notes. For the first time since Howard's death, I felt clarity cutting through the fog of grief. The woman who had stood in this office preparing cases for 3 decades was still here. And Vanessa had made a critical error in her calculations. She had dismissed that woman entirely. I spent the next 3 days methodically piecing together the full picture of Vanessa's plans. Each discovery built upon the last, creating a pattern too deliberate to be coincidence. The morning after our confrontation over lunch, I called Carl Winters, our family attorney for over 30 years. His secretary initially offered me an appointment next week, but when I mentioned Howard's recent will update, she put me through immediately. Barbara, Carl said, his voice warm with both professional courtesy and personal concern. I've been meaning to call. How are you holding up? I'm discovering things Howard didn't share with me, I said, bypassing the platitudes. About the provisions he added to our will 2 months ago, there was a slight pause. Yes. He asked me not to discuss those with you unless necessary. He didn't want to worry you. I need to know exactly what those provisions entail, I said, and I need to know today. 2 hours later, I sat across from Carl in his office as he explained what Howard had done. The updated will included specific language, ensuring that any decisions regarding our home remained solely in my control, regardless of any advice or guidance from family members. Furthermore, Howard had created a living trust that included funds specifically designated for home maintenance and repairs. Funds that were separate from our other assets and inaccessible to anyone but me. Howard was concerned about potential pressure for you to sell after his death, Carl explained, his expression carefully neutral. He wanted to ensure you couldn't be forced into any decisions about the property. Did he mention where this concern originated? Carl hesitated. He mentioned some persistent inquiries from developers, and that these coincided with suggestions from within the family that you might want to downsize. Vanessa, I said. It wasn't a question. Carl nodded once, professionally discreet, even in confirmation. Back home, I continued my investigation on Howard's computer. In a folder labeled House Documentation, I found something unexpected: screenshots of text messages between Vanessa and someone named Michael, dated just 2 months ago. Howard still refusing to discuss. Will be easier once it's just Barbara to convince. Timeline? Doctor says months, not years. We'll need to move quickly after. Property values only increasing. Group prepared to offer $650K cash. No contingencies. Need to ensure B doesn't get market analysis. Willowbrook unit reserved with refundable deposit. I stared at the screen, the air suddenly thin in my lungs. Vanessa had been planning this while Howard was still alive, knowing his prognosis, preparing to move the moment he was gone, and the offer she'd arranged was significantly below market value. Further searching revealed the connection I'd suspected. Vanessa's real estate development firm had a partnership agreement with Westside Development. She stood to gain a substantial commission if our property was acquired for their neighborhood redevelopment project. That evening, Elizabeth came by with dinner. I showed her what I'd found. That calculating little... She cut herself off, her expression darkening as she read the messages. Did Andrew know about this? I don't think so, I said. Andrew isn't devious, just compliant. He's always taken the path of least resistance where Vanessa is concerned. What are you going to do? I tapped the stack of legal documents Carl had provided. Howard already did most of it for me. The house is protected. Vanessa can't force a sale no matter how much pressure she applies. That's not what I asked, Elizabeth said, giving me the same piercing look Howard used to when cutting through my evasions. What are you going to do about the fact that your daughter-in-law was planning to exploit your grief and cheat you out of several $100,000? I looked out at the garden Howard had tended so carefully. The tulips he'd planted last fall were just beginning to bloom, their heads nodding in the evening breeze, a spring he hadn't lived to see. I'm going to make sure she understands exactly who she's dealing with, I said quietly. The next morning, I did something I hadn't done in years. I dressed in my best suit, the one I'd worn to court for important cases, and drove to Maria Diaz's office. Maria had been my law partner for 20 years before my retirement, and her specialty was still property law. Barbara, she said, embracing me. I was heartbroken to hear about Howard. I need your help, I said, skipping the condolences. I need to understand what's happening with development plans in my neighborhood. Maria's expertise proved invaluable. There was indeed a pending proposal for rezoning parts of Oakwood Heights, but it was in the earliest stages and faced significant opposition from the neighborhood association. More importantly, the proposal didn't include the specific area where our house was located. Vanessa lied about the zoning changes affecting our property, I realized. There's more, Maria said, pulling up city records. The development group that's been approaching homeowners in your area has a history of questionable tactics. They typically target elderly homeowners, especially recent widows and widowers, with below-market offers disguised as convenience or peace-of-mind propositions. She showed me a pattern of acquisitions spanning the past 3 years, all properties purchased for significantly less than market value, all from elderly sellers who had recently lost spouses. And Vanessa works with these people? I asked, though I already knew the answer. Not directly on paper, Maria said. But according to my contacts, she's been the conduit for at least 6 property acquisitions in the past year. She identifies potential targets and facilitates the initial approach, then takes a percentage when the deal closes. I felt a strange calm settling over me, not the numbness of grief, but the focused clarity I used to feel when a case suddenly came together. I need copies of everything, I said, and I need to know the specific legal term for what Vanessa is doing. Maria's smile was grim. Legally, it's called breach of fiduciary duty, with potential elements of fraudulent misrepresentation and elder exploitation. Personally, I call it despicable. That afternoon, I received a text from Andrew saying they were stopping by for dinner. The message carried Vanessa's fingerprints. My son rarely initiated family gatherings. I spent the hours preparing, not just dinner, but my approach. I organized my evidence, practiced what I would say, and made a crucial phone call to Carl to ensure I understood exactly where I stood legally. As I set the table, I felt more like myself than I had in years. Not just the grieving widow, but the attorney who had once been known for her meticulous preparation and strategic thinking. Vanessa was about to discover she had severely underestimated her opponent. I'd like to discuss something before dinner, I said, gesturing to the folder I'd placed beside my plate. I've been reviewing some documents Howard left. Vanessa's smile remained fixed, but her eyes flickered briefly to the folder. Of course, but perhaps after we eat, these things can be so overwhelming. Actually, I find clarity quite energizing, I replied, taking my seat at the head of the table. Howard's old place. Andrew, would you mind serving the salad while I share what I've learned? As Andrew moved to the kitchen, I opened the folder and removed a single printed email. Vanessa, I found some interesting correspondence between you and Howard from March about the West Side Development Group's interest in our property. Her expression remained neutral, but her right hand moved to adjust her necklace. A nervous gesture I'd never noticed before. I'm not sure what you're referring to. Andrew returned with the salad bowl. What's this about West Side Development? Your wife's employer has a partnership with them, I said calmly. They've been acquiring properties in this neighborhood for below market value, typically from recent widows and widowers. That's not exactly, Vanessa began. And the Willowbrook unit she's been so insistent about, I continued. It's priced at $75,000. Our home's current market value is $85,000. The difference is quite substantial. Andrew set the salad bowl down hard enough for the tongs to clatter against the ceramic. Mom, what are you saying? I'm saying that Vanessa arranged for Westside to make a $650,000 cash offer for our home, $35,000 below market value, while coordinating with them to reserve a Willowbrook unit that would leave approximately $275,000 unaccounted for. I laid out the printouts of text messages. She's been planning this since before Howard died. The color drained from Andrew's face as he looked from me to his wife. Vanessa, is this true? It's a complete misunderstanding, she said, her composure slipping. I was simply exploring options to help Barbara. By accelerating the sale of my home while hiding your connection to the developer, I raised an eyebrow. By claiming zoning changes that don't affect our property, by scheduling meetings with your sorority sister, the real estate agent, 3 days after Howard's funeral. Andrew picked up one of the printouts, his medical training evident in the clinical way he examined the evidence. These messages, you knew Dad's prognosis and were planning around it. That's taken completely out of context, Vanessa insisted, but her voice had risen in pitch. I removed the final document from my folder, the updated will provision Howard had made. Howard suspected what was happening. 2 months ago, he legally ensured that all decisions regarding this house remain solely in my control. The silence that followed was profound. Andrew stared at his wife with dawning horror, while Vanessa's carefully constructed facade began to crack. I was trying to be practical, she finally said. The Willowbrook unit is perfect for Barbara's needs. And the market timing, stop. Andrew's voice was quiet, but firm. Just stop, Vanessa. I looked at my son, really looked at him for the first time since Howard's death. His expression reminded me of when he was 10 and had discovered that a friend had been using him to get access to his video games. That same mixture of hurt and betrayal and growing anger. Mom, he said, turning to me. I had no idea about any of this. I swear. I know, I said gently. You've always trusted the people you love. It's one of your best qualities, and one of his most exploitable, Vanessa muttered, abandoning pretense as she realized the game was over. Andrew pushed back from the table. I think we need to go, now. Vanessa stood, gathering her Willowbrook brochures with jerky movements. This isn't over, Barbara. The house is still too much for you to manage alone. Eventually, you'll see I was right. That's where you're most mistaken, I said, rising to meet her eye to eye. I won't be alone. I've accepted Maria Diaz's offer to rejoin the firm as a consultant, focusing on elder law and property rights. My first project involves documenting Westside Development's pattern of targeting vulnerable homeowners. For the first time since I'd known her, Vanessa was speechless. She turned and walked out, leaving Andrew standing awkwardly in the dining room. I don't know what to say, he began. You don't need to say anything right now, I told him. But when you're ready to talk, really talk, I'll be here. The next morning, I dressed in another outfit I hadn't worn in years. a tailored blazer and slacks I'd kept just in case, though the case had never materialized until now. I drove downtown to Maria's law office, passing familiar landmarks that seemed both unchanged and utterly different in my newly awakened state. The receptionist smiled in recognition as I walked in. "Mrs. Lawson, Maria said you'd be coming in today. She's waiting for you in the conference room." The conference room looked exactly as I remembered it. The long mahogany table, the wall of law books, the view of the city park. Maria sat at the head of the table, just as she had during our partnership, surrounded by files and her ever-present yellow legal pads. "Right on time," she said with approval. Some things never change. What had changed, I realized as I took my seat beside her, was me. The woman who had walked out of this firm 8 years ago to care for Howard during his first health crisis had been a different person, one who had gradually allowed her professional identity to be folded away and stored like those suits in the back of my closet. For the next 3 hours, we worked together with the easy rhythm of longtime colleagues. I felt muscles in my brain awakening, like stretching after a long period of stillness. My notes were precise, my questions incisive, my strategies building upon decades of experience that had been dormant but never lost. When we broke for lunch, Maria studied me over her reading glasses. "How does it feel to be back?" I considered the question carefully, like finding something precious I thought was gone forever. 3 weeks after my confrontation with Vanessa, I found myself back in a familiar setting, the conference room of Diaz & Associates, formerly Diaz & Lawson. The long table was covered with documents, witness statements, and property records. Maria and I had worked methodically, building a case against Westside Development Group that was now impossible to ignore. The fourth homeowner confirmed the same pattern, Maria said, highlighting a section in her notes. Initial contact made by Vanessa, followed by pressure to sell quickly due to imminent zoning changes, then an introduction to Westside with a below-market offer. I nodded, mentally cataloging this newest piece of evidence. And the timeline? All within weeks of losing their spouses, Maria confirmed. "Just like she tried with you." The door opened and Carl Winters entered with his litigation associate. "We've got something," he said without preamble. "The City Ethics Commission is opening an investigation. Seems our friends at Westside have been making substantial donations to certain council members pushing for those zoning changes." A small victory, but significant. I felt a familiar surge of satisfaction, the kind I used to experience when a case came together after months of careful work. "What about Vanessa's involvement?" I asked. Carl exchanged glances with Maria. "That's where it gets complicated. Her connection is clear in our documentation, but proving legal liability rather than just ethical breaches will be challenging." "I'm not looking to punish her," I said truthfully. "I just want the pattern stopped before more vulnerable homeowners are exploited." My phone buzzed with a text from Andrew. "She's asking to meet. Says she wants to explain. What should I do?" I showed the message to Maria and Carl, who both frowned. "Legally inadvisable," Carl said immediately. "But potentially revealing," Maria countered. "If she's worried enough to reach out," I considered the options carefully. What if we arranged a meeting on our terms? Not just Andrew and Vanessa, but with representatives from all affected parties. 2 days later, I sat at the head of the conference table. To my right were Maria and Carl. To my left, a representative from the City Ethics Commission, and Judith Holmes, a 76-year-old widow who had sold her home to Westside 3 months earlier for significantly below market value. Across from us sat Vanessa, flanked by Westside Development's attorney and Michael Delgado, the company's acquisition specialist. Andrew had chosen to sit at the far end of the table, positioned neutrally between the two sides. Vanessa looked smaller somehow, her polished exterior dulled by the stress of recent weeks. When our eyes met, I saw not the confident woman who had tried to manipulate my grief, but someone realizing the consequences of her actions. "Thank you all for agreeing to this meeting," I began. my voice steady and professional. We're here to address a pattern of concerning business practices and to discuss appropriate remedies. The West Side attorney leaned forward. While we appreciate your concerns, Mrs. Lawson, we maintain that all our business practices fall within legal parameters. Let's examine those parameters, I suggested, sliding copies of our documented evidence across the table. 7 properties acquired from recently widowed seniors, all significantly below market value, all following the same approach pattern, all with your employee. I nodded toward Vanessa, making initial contact through personal connections. Michael Delgado shifted uncomfortably as I detailed the text messages between him and Vanessa, the falsified zoning threats, and the coordinated pressure tactics. The ethics commissioner took copious notes. Mrs. Holmes, I said, turning to the widow beside me, would you please share your experience? Judith Holmes straightened her shoulders. After my Frank passed, Vanessa, who I knew from community events, suggested I couldn't manage our home alone. She mentioned zoning changes that would devalue my property and introduced me to Mr. Delgado here, who offered what he called a hassle-free sale. It was only after moving that I learned my neighbors sold similar homes for nearly 100. Vanessa stared at the table, unable to meet Mrs. Holmes's eyes. The ethical violations are clear, the commissioner stated. The question is whether Westside and its representatives are prepared to make appropriate restitution, or if formal charges should be filed. I laid out our terms: financial restitution to the affected homeowners, Westside's withdrawal from the neighborhood acquisition plan, and a formal ethics certification program for all their representatives. And Ms. Ferguson's role? The attorney asked, nodding toward Vanessa. That depends on her, I said, looking directly at my daughter-in-law, on whether she's prepared to acknowledge her actions and make amends. The room fell silent. Everyone watched Vanessa, who finally raised her eyes to meet mine. I told myself I was helping, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Finding appropriate housing for seniors, facilitating sales they would eventually need to make anyway, but that wasn't the whole truth. She took a shaky breath. The commissions were substantial. The bonuses for quick acquisitions were even better. I convinced myself the ends justified the means. I kept my expression neutral even as I registered the impact of her admission. And the Willowbrook unit, the one you so urgently wanted me to see? Vanessa flushed. I own it as an investment property. The plan was to rent it to you while selling your house at a profit. Andrew made a small, pained sound from the end of the table. The naked manipulation laid bare was clearly more than he had anticipated. I think, I said carefully, that full disclosure is the beginning of accountability. The meeting continued for another 2 hours, as terms were negotiated and agreements drafted. Westside, facing the prospect of official investigation, proved remarkably amenable to our terms. By the end, we had secured not only financial remedies for the affected homeowners, but also substantive changes to their business practices. As the room cleared, Vanessa remained seated, her usual confidence entirely absent. When only Andrew, Vanessa, and I remained, she finally spoke directly to me. I underestimated you, she said quietly. I saw a grieving widow, not a skilled attorney. That was your fundamental mistake, I replied. You saw only what you expected to see. Outside the conference room, Maria waited with a satisfied smile. Justice served, she commented, as we walked toward the elevators. Not justice, I corrected. Accountability. Justice would have been preventing the harm entirely. As the elevator doors opened, I stepped inside, feeling the weight of possibility rather than grief for the first time in months. 6 months after Howard's death, I stood in our bedroom, my bedroom now surrounded by half-packed boxes. The morning light streamed through the windows in exactly the way Howard had planned when we positioned the furniture 35 years ago. Are you sure about this, Mom? Andrew asked from the doorway, watching me with concern. You don't have to change anything if you're not ready. I smiled at my son, grateful for his weekly visits since the split with Vanessa. Their divorce was proceeding without the acrimony I'd feared, both of them sobered by the circumstances that had led to it. "I'm not erasing him," I explained, closing the empty drawer. "I'm just making space for who I am now." The who I am now was still emerging, like a photograph slowly developing. 3 days a week, I consulted at Diaz & Associates on their elder protection cases. The work was demanding but deeply satisfying, using my legal expertise to protect others from experiencing what I'd nearly faced. "Help me with this," I asked, gesturing to Howard's heavy oak desk that dominated the corner of the bedroom. "I'm moving it to the study." Together we maneuvered the desk down the hallway to the room that had been Howard's domain throughout our marriage. The study had undergone the most transformation in recent months, no longer a shrine to Howard's absence, but a functional workspace reflecting my renewed professional identity. Law books I hadn't opened in years now sat alongside new volumes on elder law and property rights. "It looks right in here," Andrew said, as we positioned the desk by the window. "It does," I agreed. "Howard would approve of it being used rather than preserved." The doorbell rang, and I opened the door to find Sophia, Andrew's 19-year-old daughter from his first marriage, her arms full of textbooks. "Grandma," she exclaimed, leaning in for an awkward hug without dropping her burden. "Dad said you wouldn't mind if I studied here this afternoon. The dorm is impossible during finals week." "Of course," I said, delighted by her unexpected visit. "You can set up in the dining room or the study if you prefer." "The study sounds perfect," she said, following me down the hall. She stopped short in the doorway, taking in the transformed space. "Wow, this looks different. Good different or bad different?" She surveyed the room. Howard's desk now positioned as the focal point, my legal files organized on the shelves, fresh paint on the walls. "Good different," she decided. "It feels alive." I noticed the title of her largest textbook, Property Law, Principles and Practice. "You're taking property law?" I asked, surprised. She nodded, highlighting a passage. "It's fascinating, actually. The professor uses real-world cases to show how property rights affect people's lives. Last week we discussed predatory real estate practices targeting vulnerable populations." I smiled at the coincidence. "I might know something about that. Dad mentioned you're working with a law firm again," she said, looking up with genuine interest. "On elder protection cases? That sounds important." An idea began forming, tentative but insistent. "Would you like to hear about a real case? It might help with your studies." For the next hour, I walked Sophia through one of our current cases, a recent widower being pressured to sell his home to developers using tactics similar to what Vanessa had attempted with me. I explained the legal principles, the ethical considerations, the human impact behind the dry language of contracts and obligations. Sophia listened with increasing engagement, asking insightful questions that revealed a sharp legal mind. "So the developers are technically staying within the law, but ethically they're exploiting vulnerability?" "Exactly," I confirmed, "which is why we're working to strengthen the legal protections. The gap between what's illegal and what's harmful shouldn't be so wide." "That's what interests me most about law," Sophia admitted. "How to make it actually protect people, not just establish technical boundaries." I studied my granddaughter with new appreciation, seeing something of myself in her passionate idealism. "You know, the firm offers summer internships for law students. If you're interested in this field," her eyes widened. "Really? You think I could qualify?" "I think you'd be an asset," I said honestly. "And I could mentor you, if you wanted." The smile that spread across her face reminded me so much of Andrew at that age, eager, hopeful, standing at the beginning of possibilities. After Sophia left that evening, I sat in Howard's, my chair in the living room, reflecting on the day. The house felt different now, not empty of Howard's presence, but filled with something new alongside his memory. Purpose, connection, future. My phone rang. Maria calling about our upcoming case. I think we've found a legislative angle, she said without preamble. The state representative for your district is interested in sponsoring a bill to strengthen protections for elderly homeowners. She'd like someone with both legal expertise and personal experience to consult. Someone like me, I realized. Exactly like you, Maria confirmed. Your story is powerful, Barbara, and combined with your legal background, it makes you uniquely qualified to help shape better protections. In the study, I noticed Sophia had left a sticky note on Howard's desk. My desk now. Thanks for the case study, Grandma. You're kind of my hero right now. I smiled, touching the note gently. Hero wasn't a role I'd ever aspired to, but perhaps it was one I could grow into. On the desk calendar, no longer showing the day of Howard's death, but marked with upcoming meetings, consultations, and lunch dates. I wrote a new entry, Call State Rep Re Homeowner Protection Bill. That night, I dreamed of Howard for the first time without waking in tears. In the dream, he sat in his chair in the study, but the room was as it looked now, transformed but still holding his essence. You're doing well, Barb, he said, using the nickname only he and Elizabeth ever used. I'm trying, I told him. Not just trying, he corrected with that smile I missed every day. Succeeding. I always knew you would. I woke with the sunrise, his words lingering like a benediction. The grief remained. It always would. But alongside it grew something equally powerful. The certainty that Howard had never seen me as just his wife, just Andrew's mother, just a retired professional. He had always seen all of me, even the parts I'd temporarily forgotten. And now, so did I.